Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War, a news update for the 2nd of September 2023. Let's get to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. Of course, you can find those in the description to the video below. And another day of very high personnel losses for the Russians. 1,300, that's at the upper end of the usual range that we see from 1,000 to 1,300 at the moment, although we've just seen it go above that, I think, yesterday. And it has been, I think, a time of increased Russian losses as they're really pushing in places like Pokrovsk, also down on the highway between Vuhledar and Konstantinivka down south on the eastern front line. Okay, at the same time, the Ukrainians are pushing it in Kursk. 9 tanks lost is around about daily average, just as a tad above. 26 troop-carrying AFVs is above the daily average. This is an interesting stat and the lowest we've seen for an awful long time, below the daily average on artillery systems. That's a rarity. 10 artillery systems lost, not 40, not 50, not 60, 10. So I don't know what that tells us. Is it if it's just a random anomaly, or that the Ukrainians are starting to find Russian artillery a little hard to come by, or the Ukrainians are not having as many drones being used on the front line due to X, Y, Z. I don't know. Whatever the reason for that, I don't know that we'll find out, but a downtick in artillery systems there. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 44 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 2 pieces of special equipment. So some fairly low numbers in some categories. AFVs and tanks is fairly good, and the personnel lost is very good for the Ukrainians. And so that leads us to believe that the Russians are really pushing as much as they possibly can. And indeed, there is a whole suite of footage that you can see. Here's one example. I won't show it to you, but it's a montage of a bunch of equipment being taken out in the Pokrovsk area. So the video of a large amount of destroyed Russian equipment, says War Translated, near Pokrovsk from the 109th TRO Brigade. According to them, the Russians are suffering huge losses as they approach the front line. So this goes back to support some of these claims that I was just making about the top ticket losses there. The Russians are taking huge losses as they approach the front line, but there are so many of them that the Ukrainian soldiers cannot keep up with the flow. Wow. Okay, just one anecdote and yep, some verified confirmation of a whole suite of Russian losses. But I think it does lend credence to what I was saying. Here we have the Karadag Brigade taking out an assault group in Pokrovsk direction. This is an APC on IV that gets hit, a BTR, I think, that gets hit by direct tank shell. So he gets absolutely hammered there. What's interesting for me is that you see these troops here, and there's another one there. You get a direct hit as all of those guys are there, and they still run away. Now, I don't know whether they'd have injuries that might come to the fore a little later, but I'm always surprised at how often troops survive when there are absolutely massive explosions either near them or on the vehicle that they are in. So often we see people run out of old BMPs still surviving fundamental catastrophic explosions. So anyway, what's interesting about this group is that there are supposedly 2,000 of these Karadag National Guard offensive troops that have gone to Kursk. Some are saying that they've come have gone to Pokrovsk to support what's going on there. Some are saying that they have come from Kursk. So this could be the first example of a little bit of a wobble in one of the sides in this game of military chicken I keep talking about, as some troops from Kursk have gone down to support Pokrovsk. There is some stabilization that has taken place there, so that's good news. But yeah, essentially, that is not confirmed, but it could be worrying for the Ukrainians. However, the Ukrainians seem to be doing okay in Kursk region still. Me-2 helicopter, the Kharkiv Air Force University crashed during a training flight. Unfortunately, 2 people have died. The investigation is ongoing. I don't have any other information about that. That's a shame. We do know as well that, do I have that? No. That the Mi helicopter that crashed in Kamchatka definitely led to the death of 22 people. There have been a number of helicopter crashes in Russia of late. There's also been this rumor that I hadn't really picked up on. Bertold was like, why hasn't JP mentioned this? Because he normally mentions some of these rumors that fly around like Gerasimov, etc., etc. I just didn't know about it. I'd seen a few things, but I hadn't quite connected it because people were talking cryptically. But there are some big rumours that Lavrov has disappeared, died, gone missing, AWOL, a bit like Gerasimov. So Lavrov is the Russian foreign minister. And there are some claims that he's gone down in a helicopter. I absolutely have no idea. We'll come on to that in a little while, though. Now, let's talk about the F-16 crash last Monday. This has caused a number of rumours to circulate. One is that the air defences in the area might well have taken the plane down accidentally. This is not an unusual situation. Indeed, here we have BJ Vuris, butchered your name, sorry, saying, I worked on a simulator for the US Army surface-to-air system to train the operators not to shoot down US pilots on combat missions, friendly fire. It's a very difficult problem. Finally, the Army cancelled our project. People carefully trained on the system still shot down 5% of the good guys passing in range of each battery. Not acceptable. Finally, the Army decided to forbid engaging anyone firing at anything during the time the good guys were on air missions. Knowing some of the bad guys might slip through, but no friendly fire would take out the good guys by mistake, even with IFF and after lots of safety training for the shooters on the ground. Technology is sometimes not the answer. Can't always compensate for carefully trained, well-meaning but fallible humans. That's interesting. And I said that recently, that you do get this is really, really common. I think one correction I have to make is I talked about a Charlie 2. Was it Charlie 2 or was it Charlie 1? I think Challenger 2 tank was taken out by friendly fire in Iraq. It's the only time that a Challenger has been taken out. It has never been lost to enemy fire before this war. And I said the Americans took it out friendly fire. I think it was another Challenger that took out. Americans took out a British IFV, I think. Not that Challenger, so I had to correct that. New York Times says US officials state friendly fire probably didn't cause the Ukrainian F-16 crash last week. American and Ukrainian investigators exploring other possibilities, including mechanical failure or pilot error. So it's still an open question, not really sure, but it did happen, obviously. Now, I haven't seen any more claims about this. I don't know if this is definitely from last night. You know, pinch of salt and all that. Rostov is in flames. There are some claims that it was arson. Yeah, so arson attacks. The Russians reported that. I don't know if those are grass fires. That's in Rostov Oblast, just the other side of the Sea of Azov. No other news on that, so be careful with taking that on as gospel. Right, then we're going to move on to strikes, and there were a number of strikes last night. Russians pushing it yet again. I think they're throwing everything they can. They're consistently hammering Ukraine with Shahed drones to the point where I think they must be just throwing every Shahed drone they physically can at Ukraine, because there's been some really high numbers over the last week since that massive saturation attack. When was it? Was it last Monday, wasn't it? So anyway, 20 out of 23 Shahed drones were taken down. Another 3 were locationally lost. Electronic warfare or just falling short or whatever. So that's 100% ratio on the Shaheds. Good news there. 13 out of 14 KH-101 missiles. 1 more is lost in location. That's 100% with the cruise missiles. Really good news. Then we get on to actually a pretty good statistic here. So 9 out of the 16, which is over 50% of the ballistic missiles. So either Iskander-M or the North Korean KN-23 missiles, it's difficult to tell which is which, were shot down. This indicates a pretty good night for shooting down ballistic missiles, and also indicates that they probably were concentrating on Kyiv, since Kyiv has the best ability to shoot down ballistic missiles due to having Patriots and SAM-Ts, no doubt, around there. Okay, 0 out of 4 S-300 or S-400 missiles, that's probably up in Kharkiv direction, could be Sumy as well. 0 out of 1 missile of an unknown type. So pretty good, although that still means 7 Iskanders or similar, 4 surface-to-air missiles used in ground attack mode, and another missile. So that is 12 missiles finding their targets, not being shot down, not being intercepted. That is a lot of missiles doing, no doubt, some considerable damage last night. Now, I don't know about the damage that was done. Here's what the Euromaidan press has shared. Several hours ago, Kyiv repelled a Russian missile and drone attack, so it appears to be mainly on Kyiv, the capital. Emergency service reported several fires in the city caused by debris crashing down. So in one district, 4 cars caught fire due to missile debris. Fire was extinguished there. 2-story warehouse building caught fire, extinguished over 700 square meters. Fire near a metro station entrance, extinguished 20 square meters. Recycling point was burning. Another district, missile debris hit a boiler room of an educational institution. Fire was extinguished at 6 square meters. And then another Shevchenskivsky district, fire extinguished over a 400 square meter. Debris clearing continues. So casualties sort of being clarified at the moment. So definitely damage, definitely fires. But as per usual, we probably don't know of the actual intended targets that were hit. Maybe if military targets or critical infrastructure was hit. The Ukrainians aren't so forthcoming on that data. They don't want the Russians to hear about that so they can celebrate. Kyiv city military administration showed more damage here, typically to the city as a result of missile attacks. You've got buildings and cars being damaged. Kyiv targeted overnight by a Russian air attack. At least 3 were injured as Russia carried out missile and drone attacks across Ukraine, with damage reported in Kharkiv, Poltava and Kyiv, so 3 places, on the first day of school after summer break. And indeed, we're hearing that in Kharkiv, the children are learning, or at least largely learning, underground at the moment to keep them safe as school starts. School starts here tomorrow in my particular region in the UK, or at least in the school that my boys are at. They often have inset days, in-service training days for the teachers, and there's one today. So my boys start tomorrow, and that's when I'll be back to my normal scheduling. That's why I'm mentioning that. Russians, although today they're still in bed, so I'm doing that. Russians attacked Kyiv at night with ballistic and cruise missiles, says Nexta, and shows this video of a rather substantial explosion in Kyiv. The combined attack was successfully repelled. Most of the missiles were shot down by air defense. As a result of falling debris from the downed Russian missiles, fire started in at least 4 districts of the city. 2 people are injured. A few more than that, I think, now. The head of the Kyiv city administration said that during the nighttime shelling, air defense shot down more than 10 cruise missiles and about 10 ballistic missiles. So we had, from the other stats, 9 ballistic, and then all the cruise missiles were shot down or fell due to EW or similar, and that shows you that about half the missiles were aimed at Kyiv there. So what do we have? Oh no, 13 out of the 14 KH-101, the other one fell short. So another 4 missiles were sent in other places other than Kyiv. Now, possibly as retaliation, we saw this yesterday after Kharkiv was hit. Belgorod got hit. So this morning, Belgorod got a response from Ukraine after the missile attacks on the capital. I don't know if this is retributive. We see Russia doing that quite often. We saw that yesterday when Kharkiv was hammered by the Russians after the massive attack from the Ukrainians on the energy infrastructure across Russia. So Belgorod was hit. Don't know what happened. If anything particularly substantial. Now, yesterday, as I reported in a breaking news update, Russia committed another atrocity against Ukrainian civilians. So the Ukrainians hit energy infrastructure, not civilian infrastructure like apartment blocks and schools and whatnot. The Russians retaliated to that by flinging a bunch of ballistic missiles into Kharkiv, right across the border. There were claims of different numbers of missiles, aerial bombs. Here's 10 guided bombs and ballistic missiles, many victims. Ukraine is forbidden by its allies from striking the Russian launchers and airfields with Western weapons. There is some rumours going around this morning that the US might be lifting restrictions or toying with lifting restrictions. So, fingers crossed, might be on the cards. But we've not exactly been greeted with good news on that front particularly often. Fascist Russia says UN McDonald commits another atrocity against Ukrainian civilians in Kharkiv, while the Biden administration continues to prevent Ukraine from effectively striking Russian air bases and missile launch sites. So Biden administration is coming under a bit of flack at the moment. There's this big argument in the NATO community that it's generally accepted that Trump will not be good for Ukraine, but as a result of this decision, the Biden administration is getting a lot of hassle. And then you've got some people in like the NATO community saying, stop hassling the Biden administration so much, because you'll then give ammunition to the Trump campaign that they're going to be better for Ukraine, even though they definitely won't be. And then this becomes a bit of a problem going forward. So as bad as the Biden administration is doing on, say, lifting restrictions, they are still supposedly considerably better than the alternative. So it's a game of managing those expectations and managing those kind of news stories in a way that brings about the best outcome. Okay. Anyway, I'm just letting you know the arguments going on. 15 ballistic missile strikes on the people of Kharkiv just now, says Jay in Kiev. So he puts 15 as a number on the ballistic missiles that slammed into Kharkiv. And one of the big things that was particularly newsworthy yesterday that was struck by the Russians was a shopping centre and a sports infrastructure facility, and also residential buildings. It's that sports facility that people are very annoyed about, because it was a weekend going to be full of people, and that's when they decide to purposefully slam ballistic missiles into it. At this moment, there are 6 wounded, among them a 6-year-old child. Up to 20 S-300 and S-400 and Iskander missiles were fired at Kharkiv from Belgorod and Rostov region. So now we've got 20, so it's sort of 10, 15, 20. Some of these might have been guided glide bombs, so it's difficult to know. And there is imagery of this, big old explosions being caught live on camera. Imagine if this was a European city with 1.5 million people there instead of it being Kharkiv. What would the world's reaction be then? And of course, this has become normalized, and it's incredibly depressing. And here's another caught on video, incredible explosion there in the middle of Kharkiv. Just insane. Also double tap. This might have been a case of either Russia firing 2 ballistic missiles at that place, or a double tap attack where the second missile is targeting first responders. So as somebody noticed, something appears to already be burning at or near the site, and in fact that was claimed to be, I think, a double tap, so that where they hit somewhere, wait for first responders to get there to save them, and then hit exactly the same place again. Of course, you need to be accurate with your missiles in order to do that. On September 1st, 2024, Russia destroyed Kharkiv's sports palace. So this is what I was talking about. Remember, it's a weekend. You're going to have far more people there. Vital centre where generations of athletes trained and large-scale competitions were held. Meanwhile, Russian neutral athletes enjoy spotlight and applause at the Paralympic Games in Paris. So there's a bit of a terrible irony there. And then Kharkiv Palace of Sports is, or was, the largest indoor sports facility in Kharkiv, with a total area of 19,150 square meters, used for various sporting events, exhibitions, performances, and other mass events. Today, Russia destroyed it. Now, the Russian strikes also hit the TEC-2 SCAR combined heat and power plant in Kharkiv. So they were also trying to take out legitimate targets, if you like. I know that energy sources are a bit of a sore point with some people as to whether they qualify as being outright military targets or not. I think in the American doctrinal literature, they say that they are generally seen as military targets, or can be seen as military targets. It depends on the context, etc., etc. Okay, according to some sources, the plant was already shelled several times, along with TEC-3. While TEC-2 is a smaller one, it's still critical for Kharkiv's energy and power supply. So the Ukrainians really suffering on the energy front there. And then a 14-year-old schoolgirl. I mean, terrible. I won't show you that anymore, but it's blurred out there. A 14-year-old schoolgirl was sitting on a bench near a playground on August the 30th. When Russia attacked Kharkiv yet again, she was killed on the spot. Her head was blown off. There you go. Let's just say it how it is to remind you the horrors of war, especially when civilians are involved. In the video, the girl's mum is sitting on a bench, realizing what's just happened. Earlier, the girl's dad went missing in Donetsk region, a relative told reporters. Russia is turning our lives into utter horror, says Anton Gerashchenko. We must be given the right to defend ourselves, to prevent tragedies like this from happening. Okay, so then Sumy was also hit yesterday. This is a centre for social and psychological rehabilitation of children and an orphanage. I mean, goodness me, you couldn't get any more horrific a place to hit than a kind of a psychological institution for the rehabilitation of children from incidents like this, no doubt. And that gets hit as well as an orphanage in Sumy. Just incredible. Yeah, terrible stuff there. And indeed, next to reports, Russians hit an educational institution in Sumy with a missile. Building was in the middle of a residential district. It houses a centre for social and psychological rehabilitation of children and an orphanage. 18 people were injured, 6 of them children. Several residential buildings were damaged. Like, what is going on? Just incredible. And then it appears that this is yesterday. So Belgorod has been targeted today as a response, possibly, to the strikes on Kyiv. It was also targeted yesterday, possibly in response to Kharkiv being targeted. So, yeah, explosions in the Belgorod region. However, it might also be part of shaping operations. Could be all sorts going on there, to be perfectly frank. Okay. I mean, especially when Belgorod is one of the places where these S-300 and S-400 missiles are being sent from, you can bet your bottom dollar that Ukraine are concentrating on taking out the launchers that are sending those missiles into Ukraine, as they did before with HIMARS. At the beginning of the Kharkiv offensive, where the Russians attacked from Belgorod into Kharkiv, the Ukrainians brought up their HIMARS and took out a bunch of S-300, S-400 systems, and Kharkiv was let off for like a month or whatever. But then since then, we started seeing these surface-to-air missile systems being used to attack Kharkiv again. But we haven't seen then the consequent taken out of those systems by HIMARS. So waiting for that to happen. Right, okay, we're now going back to the strikes from the previous night when the Ukrainians did that massive attack on Russian infrastructure, going as far as Moscow and hitting a power station, wasn't it? You've got oil refinery as well, Moscow Blast. We are still not quite sure how much damage was done. It might have been that the Russians did a really good job of taking out 158, as they claim, of the Ukrainian drones. Based on the nature and colour of this fire, says Will Teal, I reckon they've hit the gas processing and storage area in the picture below. Good choice, as it is a sympathetic target for a small drone and will definitely take the whole facility offline. This facility... so I remember, if you remember, I showed you that imagery of it on fire. Serves to balance loads for the nearby nuclear power plant and its loss in conjunction with any others that can be hit, as well as strikes on major substations near the nuclear power plants could cause some serious problems to the Russian industry. OLUK, and without killing heaps of civilians. So that's why they're aiming for this kind of stuff, because it will affect the production of military equipment taking place in nearby Electrostyle, forging plant, etc., etc. So it could be that the Ukrainians had some success there, but there's a bit of joining the dots to be done, and what's being done there. Now, if we go back to Rostov, where you had the Atlas depot that was struck and was on fire for 4 or 5 days. Here, satellite images obtained by MT Anderson show in detail that at least 8 tanks and another 4 were affected. So you got 8 tanks there, definitely taken out those 4 would be done for, one would have thought. Most of the others seem to be in fairly good nick, but as we heard previously, that doesn't mean that they definitely are. You might get some real problems caused by heat damage. but that's finally been put out there. So approximately 10 storage tanks were destroyed, said no reports. Yes. Okay, so that was pretty problematic for the Russians. You also had the other one in Rostov that was on fire for. Have I got one reporting that? No, they were talking about it being on fire for 16 days and finally extinguished. That was the Proletarsk oil depot. Incredibly big blaze there. Okay, right, moving on to a little bit more satellite imagery analysis. The recent Ukrainian drone attacks on Moscow revealed several previously unknown air defense systems in the Moscow Oblast, including one in Kilmovsk, which can also be seen on Planet satellite imagery taken on July the 7th, and then puts in the coordinates. This is always useful, open source, helping out the Ukrainians with their targeting of, in this case, Russian air defense system, possibly a Pantsir S1 put on some. You see these not infrequently, the Russians building these structures to give more height and therefore better radar capabilities for air defense systems. But yeah, we've got a map then of air defense systems, dynamic map of post-war air defense positions in Moscow and Moscow Oblast, including some that are no longer in place with green pins. You might ask why. I'm not sure if this one was revealed due to the Ukrainian attack too, but this is the most detailed Pantsir photo I've ever seen on Yandex panoramas. So you go, Yandex is the equivalent of Google, so going on Google Street basically, and being able to see a Pantsir S1 that well is a bit of a OPSEC problem for the Russians. What's particularly interesting about this Pantsir S2, are the anti-drone nets, one above the cabin and one behind the vehicle. Interesting there. Now, this then leads people to be putting these maps together. Fabian Hoffman says, keep in mind that Moscow is protected by a ring of S-300 and S-400 air defense sites, most of which should cover the refinery. So that's a refinery that was indeed hit in the end. So that some drones got through and took out or flew into refinery and power station in Moscow and Moscow Oblast is incredible. This refinery in Moscow itself is actually incredible. Additionally, there are at least 9 recently redeployed Pantsir S1s or S2 systems that should have been able to protect against this type of drone attack, but they didn't. Now, they did to some large degree, and this is a case of overwhelming defenses, is what the Russians do to the Ukrainians and what the Ukrainians need to do to the Russians. You know, instead of sending 100 drones or 158 drones to a whole host of different locations, maybe send 158 drones to one location and absolutely take that out and get the air defenses to use up all their interceptors. The inability of Russia's air and missile defense systems to protect against relatively crude long-range one-way attack drones is surprising. While the S-300s and S-400s have demonstrated utility in Ukraine, they appear to consistently underperform in territorial point defense, he says. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. Andrew Perpetua has a rather testy rant about people's analysis of Kursk, and I did an analysis which I've just released this morning with permission from Silicon Curtain Jonathan. Like, it's a panel discussion I had with Mesa Gifford and Sean Pinner about 9 days ago on Kursk. And then I did my big analysis, was it yesterday, which I think was a pretty decent analysis of what's going on, that competition between Kursk and Pokrovsk. And not trying to paint it in a more positive light, but actually showing that the Kursk incursion had strategic effects that putting those same troops into Pokrovsk never would have had. People are not looking at this from a high enough viewpoint. They're talking to people in Pokrovsk and them saying how terrible it is, and then concluding that it's terrible those troops up in Kursk weren't brought down to Pokrovsk because, look, they're losing ground in Pokrovsk. Yeah, they're taking more ground in Kursk, and they're having strategic impact on Russia. They're having morale impact on Russia, positive morale on Ukraine, and taking logistical elements out in that area. They are causing the Russians to bring PMC troops across from Burkina Faso. I mean, this has a geopolitical strategic impact in a way that shoving a bunch of those same troops into Pokrovsk would not have done. they wouldn't have wrested back initiative. It would have been a defensive move, putting all your best troops into Pokrovsk and stopping them taking parts of Pokrovsk. Okay, that's good, but you can do better, and that's what Kursk does. That's my opinion. So Andrew Perpetua, it's interesting to hear him say sort of similar-ish things. No offense, but you're an actual living, breathing idiot. No offense, but offense. If you think anything going on in Kursk has anything to do with Ukraine losing the area around Pokrovsk, please remind me, was the loss in Stepova before or after the invasion of Kursk? Was the loss of Bedichi before or after the invasion of Kursk? Was the loss of Ocheritina before or after the invasion of Kursk? Were the Ukrainian soldiers and commanders screaming at the top of their lungs all through 2022 that there had to be defences built behind Ocheritina before or after the invasion of Kursk? If you have such a short attention span, you're a complete effing idiot. Half the people bitching about Kursk attack didn't even know where Ocheritina was prior to October. Half these idiots were screaming that Ukraine had to focus all of their forces in one attack south when they didn't even know where Krasnohorivka was on a map, or they didn't even know that Vasily was a major defensive point because Vasily isn't on a Google map, as I often complain. Some of these idiots thought Vasily was south of Avdiivka, and I had to DM them telling them it was north. That's how little they knew about the situation. And then they think they know everything to bitch about Kursk. I completely agree. I can't speak to people's skills and knowledge base in terms of their analysis, but my opinion is that the Kursk cross calculation is far more complex than many people are thinking. And if they want Ukraine to just remain on the defensive, not rest back initiative and sit back and always react to Russia, then by all means put all those troops into Pokrovsk and stop the Russians taking a few more fields. And even if they lose Pokrovsk, it won't change the war at all. Something that has much greater effect on changing the war by changing the political calculus in the Kremlin is attacking into Russia and taking far more territory than they're losing and causing Russia to react to Ukraine. Anyway, I won't go down that route again, but interesting that myself and Andrew and I generally agree on that. Right, Kursk panic, says War Translated's Dmitry. War correspondent Roman Saponkov reports that after rumours circulated about Ukrainians breaking through the Lvov-Kursk highway last night, so Ukraine is still potentially making some decent inroads into Kursk. Local self-defense forces, so possibly these volunteers they put together from local people, basically militias, armed civilians, as he says, opened friendly fire, nearly killing Russian soldiers. He says it's not the first time it's happened. There have been a number of friendly fire incidents going on in the Kursk region, particularly. There you go. So that's from a Russian source. Now, this is returning to the Sergei Lavrov issue. Where is Lavrov? Says Anton Gerashchenko. Where Lavrov? There have been many Lavrov's statements in the Russian media over the past 24 hours, but no one seems to have seen him personally. Every year on September the 1st, so it's yesterday, and this year on September the 2nd, so that's today, Lavrov gives a lecture at Moscow State Moscow State Institute of International Relations, MGIMO. If he is not there tomorrow, i.e. today, so if Lavrov's not there today, something is going on, because he does that every single year. Then there will be really a lot of questions about where he is. So Lavrov will chair the Russian delegation of the 79th session of the UN General Assembly. Putin signed a corresponding decree today. Honestly, I'm sick and tired of writing about the shame of Russia being in the UN. But I'll say one more time, it's a shame. Talaria will wax lyrical about that. But, you know, you can sign all you like about Lavrov. The idea is that he ain't there at the moment. So now there are all these memes. Where is Lavrov? And you see them, you know, posted all over the shop. And yeah, it's interesting. We've got potentially another Gerasimov situation. Okay, could be in a hospital, might be a bit sick, could be whatever. But he's certainly not been seen when you would expect him to be seen. So some people call arguments from silence invalid. They are not. They are sound. If you would expect. So the idea is that you can't say just because there's no evidence that it didn't happen. But if it happened and there was no evidence when you would absolutely expect there to be evidence, then that argument from silence is a positively sound argument. So you can have sound arguments and silence. So we would expect the foreign minister to, as we've seen him so frequently, and having not seen him for a long time, it is justified for us to go, something weird's going on. Now, if he suddenly pops up, then there will be questions like, well, where did you go? That was a bit weird that you went AWOL for some time. That's still weird, right? So anyway, the rumour's out there. There you go. One of the most frequently raised questions, says Tatarigami, following Ukraine's strikes on industrial or oil infrastructure is, how will this lead to victory for Ukraine? The answer is straightforward. Viewed in isolation, each individual action, be it sanctions or on a specific Russian bank, the liberation of a small village or the destruction of a single oil refinery, does not win a war by itself. Victory is achieved through a series of operational successes, each built upon tactical victories. When neither side can secure a clear and decisive victory, such as by capturing the enemy's capital and changing the government, the war shifts into a phase where endurance, willpower, social fatigue, and resourcefulness are tested. Incremental changes, while seemingly minor in the moment, can eventually lead to these significant shifts. The impact of each action might not be immediately visible, but every effort that undermines Russian economic stability and its capacity to sustain the war contributes to Ukraine's broader strategic advantage. Predicting which action will be the tipping point is almost impossible, but the decisive effect of the final drop relies on the cumulative impact of all preceding actions. Cumulative is the right word here. So Russia is suffering from a cumulative pressure put on it militarily, politically, economically, financially, so on and so forth. Every little piece of the jigsaw or every bit of pressure being applied by not only Ukraine, but actually more predominantly in this cumulative effect by entities like the US State Department, US Treasury, in terms of sanctions, secondary sanctions on China. So now we're hearing that China is accepting gold from Russia to buy stuff, but Russia is using its gold reserves to do transactions with China because of secondary sanctions on Chinese banks placed on them by the US administration. So all of these things have an effect, and at some point there could be just this straw that broke the camel's back capitulation, or we could just see, which I think is what we are seeing, this general decline of Russia in their ability to operate in the way that they would like, and they are just being chipped away at, week in, week out, in terms of labor shortage, in terms of foreign exchange, in terms of reserves, in terms of what they're spending on their welfare state because they're redirecting all the money to the war, in terms of literal deaths and destruction of material, and so on and so forth. And then, you get the hydrocarbons industry and the energy infrastructure being hammered, then goodness me, that's going to take a massive toll on the Russian economy and psyche. So this does not, he concludes, this does not imply that every tactical victory will automatically translate into operational and consequently strategic success. However, using a $500,000 drone to destroy an industrial facility that generates $50 million annually has a lasting impact. When such actions are scaled and repeated regularly, they can exert considerable pressure on Russia, making the continuation of such a costly war increasingly difficult. So we now have a game of infrastructure attrition. Who has the most missiles and drones to send at the other country? And as well, who has the greatest network of air defense with the best air defense capabilities? And this is why Ukraine have been crying out for air defenses for so long. It's not just defensive. Well, it is defensive, obviously, but it's part of their offensive strategy. So we need to attrit the Russians, but the more we attrit the Russians, the more volatile the Russians will become, and the more they'll want to send everything they have at Ukraine, including possibly their strategic reserves of missiles. So the Ukrainians will know that, that 158 wave attack, or 160, 170, or however many it was, wave attack against Russia 2 nights ago will have caused the Russians to become vengeful and retributive, and they would want to hit willy-nilly Ukraine. And that means Ukraine needs more air defense systems to provide a greater network. So part of their offensive strategy is to make sure that they have the defenses in order to mitigate against the ramifications from attacking. Hope that makes sense. So that's why they've been calling out all those reasons that we know that they've been calling out for air defences, because they bloody need them. Everywhere in Ukraine, says Gerashchenko again, there are regular electricity blackouts that last for hours. If we're lucky, they are scheduled, and often they are urgent and unpredictable. A supermarket in Kiev is on the video here. Autumn, then winter are coming. Winter is coming. The blackouts will probably be getting more and more severe. Ukrainians are preparing for them as much as we can. But how can we survive a winter in a city with no electricity? The elderly, the sick, the small children, families, people living on top floors of high-rise buildings. No electricity means no water, no working elevators. Add this to frequent Russian strikes of our cities and villages. I'm not sure that the world realizes how challenging and exhausting it is to be in Ukraine these days. How tired we all are, and we do our best not to lose our spirit and hope. It's a really good point that 2.5 years into this war, with a terrible winter on the way, no doubt, in terms of comfort and survivability, heat and electricity, this will be taking its toll on the Ukrainians, massively so. They must be exhausted. They must be wanting this to all end. This will be affecting their morale. Something like Kursk is good for their morale, but they need more. They need the West to just come to their aid in such significant ways. Lifting those restrictions on strikes is long, long overdue. Right. Now to go on to disinformation and my normal little rant about Elon Musk. This is its time, but this pertains to China and Russia. Elon Musk pretends to be the champion of free speech. He criticizes the Brazilian judge. So what happened is Musk's Twitter kind of broke the rules in Brazil. Brazil asked them for X, Y, and Z. Musk refused to give it to them because he was on the side of the opposition in Brazil. And he didn't give it to them. And then Brazil are going to shut down. I think they're in talks at the moment now, actually. So he might be compromising a bit. But Brazil are going to shut down Twitter. What's really interesting is when China previously asked for Twitter, was it India asked for Twitter to do something, Twitter capitulated to what India wanted. So it's free speech when it's convenient to be free speech, and otherwise it's we'll do whatever you ask as long as we get what we want. As long as Musk gets what he wants. He's not really interested in free speech. He's interested in whatever he's interested in: natural resources, power, money. Musk pretends to be a champion for free speech. He criticizes the Brazilian judge, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and European policies. But I've yet to see him utter a single word of disapproval on Russia and China, where Twitter is banned. Twitter's actually banned in China and Russia. Why doesn't he have a go at them? That's actual free speech restriction. Why doesn't he go nuts on them? Oh, because he gets massive amounts of raw materials from China and Russia in order that SpaceX and Tesla can operate. In fact, he gets operation in China that no other Western corporation has. And what's a quid pro quo there, I wonder? So, really problematic. I despise the man anyway. But he is just the biggest bundle of double standards you could possibly ask for. Anyway, that's my lasting rant. I say lasting because when I press stop in a second, I'm going to be shouting at the blank screen about Musk. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pips.